Okay, so this is blood sugar workshop. So thank you guys for joining. I'm hoping that you guys can not just consume this info, but also like take away some things to really apply. 'Cause it's a new month, so time for some new health intentions. I'm obsessed with Pinterest, little like just funny photos. So these are the ones I found today on my scrolling. um, Always be Delulu. Okay, so when getting into blood sugar, one resource if you are not yet super confident in knowing which foods contain which macronutrients would be this one. So we're going to go through one of my guidebooks that I've worked on for a while, just of compiling a lot of this info. And this diagram is in there. And so this will make more sense later on, but make sure you keep coming back to this because we want to know the difference between carbs, fats, protein. Did you print it out? That's awesome. And so why blood sugar is super important. And when I say blood sugar, that is actually like, okay, how much glucose is in our bloodstream, which comes from our food, but also our body will secrete glucose into the bloodstream from our liver and from some small amounts that is stored up when we need that available energy, which is why the stress is really a big piece, because when we're stressed, our body's like, okay, we need energy available just in case of something happening. Our bodies are so smart. And then insulin is the hormone that we will dive into more. But in my research and just my own experiences, realizing how important this really is, that it really improves heart health risk factors a lot more than even like eating a heart healthy diet, which sometimes there's overlap between heart healthy diets and like what I'm going to talk about, but we're finding that the blood sugar insulin piece is so much more important even than like cholesterol, really. So decreases inflammation, which also, like for a lot of women, inflammation impacts our skin health, PCOS, endometriosis, digestive issues. So for me, I think that's a big reason why my skin has gotten better too, is from improving blood sugar. Lowers breast cancer risk, and then even like ovarian cysts are an issue that we might not think is related to nutrition, but those inflammation spikes can really increase cysts and like PMS and things. So, and then also body composition too. If we have lower insulin levels, we're gonna lose weight easier. And that is one reason why the GLP-1s like Ozempic work really well, is because it does help regulate insulin and how our cells are responding to insulin. So this is the guide we're gonna go through today. So I'm not gonna cover every single page, and I definitely would say still like go back, read over this, digest it again. It's a lot of information, and I try not to do information overload, but I struggle with that. So these first few pages are kind of just going into some things that we can assess on a deeper level that our doctors and our very rare doctor appointments don't always dive into because we don't maybe have the time. So this is a lot of what I'm assessing on clients when I first meet them, are symptoms like this that are telling me that there's something deeper, and oftentimes blood sugar can help with some of these factors. So do we have hormonal issues? Stress. So something like feeling really wired and tired at night, feeling tired, needing a lot of caffeine are some red flags that maybe we have some issues with our stress hormones. The hunger, I mean, like feeling hunger is normal every 3 to 6 hours. That's a normal response. But if it's excessive, and that sometimes can be related to blood sugar, or if we don't feel any hunger, that's also not good. And so like I know, Meredith, you were saying that feeling shaky before you're hungry, that, like I said, could be maybe that we're not eating enough regularly, or we're missing certain nutrients, or it could be maybe that your blood sugar is having some trouble staying regulated. Hopefully that will make more sense towards the end of this. And then thyroid conditions too are just something to look for, and blood sugar can help improve thyroid health as well. Then assessing some of the root causes of things that we can take some action on to figure out if that might be why we're having these issues. Would be like our macronutrient intake, our micronutrient intake, as well as our gut health would impact how we absorb these things. And then things that help to regulate our stress response, improve our ability to respond to stress. That was a lot. Some of the foundational things that I really practice in my coaching, is having a little bit of an awareness of the calories as well as the macronutrients. I don't typically have people tracking meticulously with calorie tracking apps, but still making sure we're not in a calorie deficit is going to be important. We can be in a little bit of a deficit, but not too much for too long, especially with thyroid and hormonal things that can be really harmful. Timing our macros appropriately. When we learn some of the benefits of like the fat intake, that starts to really click for people and we feel more energy. Micronutrients is something that also is oftentimes missed in the women's health space. We can take a multivitamin to get some of those gaps, but also doing some testing can be helpful. Maintaining a healthy relationship with food, that really comes back to the stress piece. If we're constantly stressed about food and about our diet and confused, then we're gonna have more stress hormones and we're gonna have higher blood sugar as a result sometimes. I've definitely seen women who are not overeating, they're skipping breakfast, and they have really high insulin levels, and it's not from sugar and carbs. So that is why that relationship with food can be so impactful. And then quality ingredients too. There are just going to be some things like high fructose corn syrup that I just don't want you to have because it just has horrible effects on the body. I don't want you to have it all the time. Okay, when we go out to eat, I'm a lot less strict. But and so I do say like high protein over here in the guide. When I say high protein, I'm not meaning like be a bodybuilder, eat above the recommended amounts, but there is a variety of like levels studied, and how it's usually studied is in grams per kilogram of body weight is, so you can go all the way up to like 1.2, 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight. You can also do this type of eating style if you're vegetarian, vegan too. You don't have to be having tons of meat. Okay. So a little more on why the cortisol and insulin is so important. All body sizes, and I want to scream this from the rooftops, all body sizes can have high insulin levels. All body sizes can have low insulin levels, okay? That is where the composition of our meals and our daily habits can really be important. And we can be skinny fat, we can be poor hormonal issues with still being a small body size. And that's what's really hard for a lot of women, is that we want to think about body size as an indicator of health when it isn't always. So this is just like some of the quotes from favorite books of mine that talk about this. We don't need to like go and read them, but I do want to look at this little diagram here, deep dive into the HPA axis. So the HPA axis is how our brain registers stressors and tells our stress glands to respond. So what's really interesting is that can you guys hear that car horn going off outside my apartment? Okay, good. There's like a car that just got set off. Okay, it stopped. So whether we are in a stressful situation, like we are running from a lion, or we are thinking negative, anxious thoughts, we are stressing about work, or we're in a really low calorie state, all those things are pretty much registered the same way by the HPA axis. And so unfortunately, like that is one reason why people who have like childhood trauma or any life traumas oftentimes have health conditions come up later on and have higher risk of a lot of diseases. That's why mental health can be so impactful, but also why chronic dieting can really be harmful, because if we look down here at the effects of more cortisol, and cortisol is not inherently bad. We definitely need some cortisol. Some people have too low of cortisol too. But the pregnenolone and progesterone over here, that's influencing our sex hormones. So progesterone is what we produce after ovulation. It has a lot of benefits for our skin, for anti-anxiety. We want to have progesterone. And so if we have too much cortisol, we're not going to get that as much of it because we're stealing it away. It's called pregnenolone steal theory. And maybe you're not super concerned about that, but increased muscle breakdown. That is where we have long-term health risks, and we already lose weight faster after, I don't know what age, 35 or 40, which seems kind of crazy, but it just starts to be harder to put on that muscle. So that's where starting these habits earlier the better. And then it says store glucose release into the bloodstream. So that's where I said that maybe we aren't overeating carbs and things, but we're still having high insulin potentially from stress. Does that all make sense? Do we have any questions so far?
I did put just a book in the chat that was recommended to me regarding glucose stuff. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it. It's called The Glucose Revolution: The Life-Changing Power of Balancing Your Blood Sugar.
Ooh,
Who wrote it?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jesse
I've read it, but cool.
Post.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've not read it. The one book I refer to in one of the other slides that I really like is called Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. And she talks quite a bit about blood sugar. It's like a really thick book, but it has so much good info. And then also Glucose Goddess on Instagram. I sometimes reshare her posts. She has really great diagrams about blood sugar. Okay, so let's actually get into some of the habits now. Hopefully we know kind of why it's important. Why I'm obsessed with blood sugar. So first one, follow the CPF plus meal method. So that is where in each meal or snack, we try to include a carb, fat, protein, and fiber food. Okay, and so I would say, I mean, that's ideal. As long as we're pairing the carb with protein or fat, that's better too. So maybe, maybe you're just eating like two things, like peanut butter and an apple. There is going to be a little protein in there, but when I say protein, I mean like a larger serving, like 15 to 30, maybe 40 grams, hopefully. Okay, and so then the next one we'll get into is the glycemic index, what that term means. And then lastly, being holistic about our approach, thinking not just about food, but knowing that our exercise, sleep, stress, all these things also will have impacts. So let's look a little deeper at the CPF plus plate method. So this is really where we still can be aware of calories, yes, but when we do this and we keep our blood sugar more stable, it's a lot less likely that we're going to overeat. So definitely reach out to me if you're concerned about calories and things, but let's kind of look at the portions here. So fourth of our plate being protein, a fourth being a starchier carb. So when I say starchy, I'm referring to things higher in carbs. They have less water content. So like pasta, rice, bread, beans, potatoes, oats, quinoa. That's where that Venn diagram would come in, or the circle chart. And then a non-starchy carb is usually gonna be higher in fiber. And that would be a good portion. And then our fat could come from a dressing. And we'll get into types of fats. Another look here would be maybe a little bit bigger portion of the protein, another starchy carb portion. The fat would be like from cheese, and then maybe you didn't get much fiber in that time, but there's some fiber in potatoes, and then you do a drink that's a little lower carb. So beer, not super low carb, but in moderation, still be within that like 70 grams of carbs or less in a meal. Okay, so CPF plus makes sense, the principle of it. Obviously we have to know, like I said, which foods contain which to do that. So glycemic index is like how much a food actually spikes our blood sugar, right? So we don't want huge spikes and drops. So the portion of the food, but also the type of the food or the carb will matter for glycemic index. And before we even look at the list, one thing I have just learned, and I'm doing a new certification that's so good, and it's connecting a lot of dots with me for nutrition and like functional medicine, because that's a whole other side of things that I really didn't learn a ton of in my dietetic schooling. It's a lot more of a conventional approach. But like all cultures, there's so many different stuff, like ways to eat, but they all are pretty low glycemic. And this is like in the past, before industrialized food. But still, a lot of them are following these things. They have a lot of root vegetables, so we're not carnivore and completely having no carbs and fiber. Not a ton of grains, and when they are typically like soaked, sprouted. So there's some good videos on how to soak and sprout carbs, but things like Ezekiel bread have more of the sprouted grains. They just have more nutrient density overall. And then if they do have a lot of carbs, like when we think about some Asian cultures that eat a lot of rice, they're typically more higher in resistant starch, which when we cool rice, it actually increases this. So I'm gonna come back to the list, but I do want to show this. So this is kind of a nuanced thing, but I think it's super interesting. How we sometimes cook a food can really impact how it is digested and the response it has on our blood sugar. So studies have found that when we cool our rice for longer times, so they looked at in this study 12 hours or 10 or 24, this type of starch increased. And so that had better blood sugar response because it's not as like digested then in our body. It's more fed to the gut microbes. So then it doesn't go into our bloodstream. That essentially makes sense. So yeah, there's lots of ways we can alter carbs too and pair them. So we're not completely eliminating. I mean, there's cultures that eat a lot of pasta too. Sourdough bread too is another one that when they're more fermented carbs, they actually have less blood sugar response. So let's look at the list here. Some of the things higher on the glycemic index would be like fruit juices, sodas, alcohols, like Gatorade, ice cream, and plain milk are a little bit higher, but that is one reason why I say to do the full fat dairy products. That fat helps to stabilize that spike. Corn, rices, quinoa, pasta, white pastas, or white flours, white potatoes. But again, we don't need to completely eliminate those things in the high group. We just want to be aware that they're a little bit higher. And over here, some of the low to moderate things. So actually some of the plant-based milks are a little bit lower than like oat milk is pretty high on the glycemic index. Grainier breads, the sourdough breads, yogurt's great, nuts, seeds, meats and eggs that have like very little amounts of carbs. Beans are really good. Potatoes I have over here as well. Because again, those have some other really great properties. Especially
I was actually curious, what's it? So you have like potatoes, both sweet potatoes and then just potatoes on the low to moderate glycemic index, but then you have white potatoes on the high.
I know.
Are there that many types of potatoes?
I need to fix that. I think that's an error on my part, but
Okay.
I would really just say, I mean, potatoes are a good option to be having. Don't fret too much about the fact that they're a little higher on the glycemic index.
Okay.
But just being aware of proportion. And trying to have the skin with them too can really help. Okay. So then, one other topic that's a little more nuanced too is fructose versus glucose. So pretty similar to glycemic index, but a lot of foods higher in fructose will be high in the glycemic index. So yeah, that's where like fruit juices and dried fruits that are maybe natural, not super like processed, still could be harmful if we are concerned about blood sugar. And I don't mind doing a few ounces of fruit juice a day. Like I'll add it with a LaCroix or like an iced tea as a way to sweeten it. It's just more like if we're doing this in excess, and we're doing it without doing some of these other things like the CPF meal method. So unfortunately, like that might be why when you were younger, possibly, I know that for me at least, I started my day with a bowl of cereal and a huge glass of orange juice for years. And so it's like kind of no wonder we have some hormone issues pop up once we're in adolescence. I didn't eat meat either. Like I wasn't really aware of protein. I did do milk, so that was a source of protein, but it was always skim milk too. So like the more I learn, it makes sense. I didn't do real butter. I did the vegetable oil butter. And I would never be like, don't eat fruits like apples and things. It's just that they are higher in fructose. So I put over here, don't be a fruitarian. Don't eat only fruit all the time. Don't think you guys do that. I've rarely seen somebody overeat fruit, but too much of anything can be too much. I would say checking condiments though, like ketchup, is one, or like some of the more processed snacks and things. Really trying to avoid high fructose corn syrup. Or like even things with a lot of honey, agave, not great. I always want to choose more of like the stevia type of a sweetener, like an Olipop, or I get the drops on Amazon for that have stevia. I don't know if you guys have tried any of those, but let me know if you have questions about which sweeteners to use. Okay. One of my favorite topics is the fats. Like I was saying, I think that a lot of women are starting to do good with the protein. There's a lot more knowledge about that. The fats can still be really confusing. Okay. And there still is a lot of talk about cholesterol in food. People are still confused about that. And really within like the past probably 5 to 6 years is when the science and the functional medicine community have really started to push more of the, okay, saturated fat in food is good, is fine, is good actually. We want to eat your grass-fed beef. That's kind of where a lot of people going carnivore have found a lot of health benefits, even keto. I'm not saying you should do those extremes, but so that is why 5 to 6 years of research still not really through to the medical community. It takes a long time. So types of fats. Saturated fat, mostly going to be in like meats, full fat dairy, butter, and coconut oil. So all of these things I would liberalize and include in that CPF plus meal method, right? So like if you're doing chicken and a potato, chicken is very lean, there's not a lot of fat, add some butter. Or if you need to sneak in coconut oil with like a coffee or something, if in the morning you're doing like something like a yogurt bowl and you like got the Greek yogurt that has no fat and you do some berries, you could sneak some coconut oil in there. That is really going to make it last longer, keep your blood sugar stable for longer, and also just help you to hit your overall calorie goals if you're struggling to reach that, which a lot of people are still in that deficit. Does that make sense of why we can include those? Okay. So then we have the omega-3 and omega-6, which are like a subcategory of a type of unsaturated fat called polyunsaturated fat. And so we've also found that our ratio of omega-3 to 6 has gotten way different than it was 50 to 100 years ago. And partly a reason that we're having a lot more inflammation, pro-inflammatory conditions. So really including those omega-3s is really important, as well as trying to decrease some of the omega-6s and not necessarily the meats and eggs, because right, those also have the saturated fat, but more so like the vegetable oils. So that's where being cautious of some of those salad dressings that have canola oil and corn oil, soybean oil. We want to opt for more of the olive oil avocado ones. Those don't have saturated fat, but they do have monounsaturated fat, which is a less inflammatory option for sure. So same with like nuts, avocados, we can be including those. I think of those kind of more as like a condiment, like something you sprinkle on a salad or a sandwich. Some people who don't eat meat would get more of their protein and calories probably from nuts, which is fine. But if you're doing meat, you don't probably need to include a ton of nuts in your diet, but still can be a daily thing. So gist of all of this info here is just kind of being aware of what types of oils you're using. Are you getting a fat in your meals daily? If you want to track them and see where you're at with your calories from fat, anywhere from like 20% of your calories to 60% of your calories can fit within a healthy diet. Again, you don't have to be fully keto to still eat a little bit higher amounts of fat. And then try to include some good saturated fats and some omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, so I like to use cod liver oil as a supplement too to get some of the omega-3s, as well as it has some vitamin A and vitamin D. So that's typically the one I recommend for women. Sometimes I'll use a Nordic Naturals brand omega-3 product too, especially pre-conception. That's a really good nutrient to be getting in. for if you have period cramps, PMS, any inflammatory skin stuff, definitely including that as a supplement. Otherwise, I think you can get it a lot of food. If you do some seafood, want to get sardines into my diet. I haven't done that one yet. Because they're a really good source of omega-3s and other nutrients. So this is also in the guide. I think just some good ways to brainstorm ideas and how to really utilize that CPF plus method. I tried to kind of rethink some of the classic recipes that I grew up eating of how you could include a little more fiber and protein and fat. Because a lot of those are pretty carb based. So it's really just being creative too. Figuring out what foods you do enjoy and doing some tracking can be super helpful too. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys. Another fun Pinterest find. Hopefully you guys keep leaving your house to go shopping and trying new products, because I think that's a big piece of it too, is just like learning which condiments you enjoy, so you can just add that into really simple meals like rice and chicken, potatoes and beef, yogurt and fruit type of a thing. So yeah, there's also I do always advocate for testing insulin levels if you have implemented some of this stuff, you're still struggling with symptoms, whatever that might be. The insulin test is unfortunately not very common still in practice. Like I said, this stuff is really still within 5 years of research and just hasn't quite made it to our primary care doctors, because also there's not always a medication to treat insulin resistance other than things like Ozempic, which are an option if people are looking to lose weight. But if somebody is not of a larger body size, they're probably not going to put them on that. Maybe in the future, we might be seeing like low doses of that to help with insulin resistance, which is where your cells aren't responding. But I would say like there are some nutritional products like berberine and inositol that I go to for some clients. Questions? Anything you guys want to go back to?
What were those things that you just mentioned that you give to clients who have?
Yeah, so inositol is a B vitamin that has been shown to be really great for blood sugar, helps with ovulation too. That I think you could definitely try. As well as berberine's another one. That one's a little more like also helpful for gut health. That one I would want to maybe do a consult with someone before trying that, just to kind of help them understand what it's doing, because it's a little stronger, I would say. But yeah, inositol and just like a good multivitamin while you're implementing all of these habits would definitely be something I'd recommend doing. They're very like low risk things, just really getting more vitamins that are depleted in our food supply into our diet.
What type of
Like,
vitamins are in?
Hmm?
Sorry.
Good.
What type of vitamins are in inositol?
It's one of the B vitamins, B8.
Okay.
Yeah. So in my full script, I have 2 of those that would be the right like ratio and dosing, because there are different ones out there. Other things. I mean, there otherwise like habits and stuff that influence blood sugar too would be like going on a walk after you eat would help to decrease blood sugar. If that's something we're concerned with. Whereas from Meredith, you're a little more concerned with like low blood sugars. So one thing I didn't ask you earlier is like, how often do you eat? Do you eat breakfast, lunch, dinner?
So I force myself to eat breakfast. Just like I usually do like a protein shake or something that gets like my protein going. And
Good.
then at lunchtime, I usually do like a meat, pasta, fruit. But it's usually very small. I teach 3rd grade, and our lunch ends up being like 20 minutes, and I'm up on my feet running around.
Yeah.
And then by the time I get home, I'm always like, oh gosh, I waited too long.
So I think like adding some coconut oil or MCT oil maybe with your lunch, or like nuts could be a way to just kind of like quickly get in some extra, not just calories, but that fat, which would sustain you a little longer.
Mhm.
Or you could like snack on that maybe mid-afternoon. I didn't really talk about MCT oil, but that's like a derivative of coconut oil. That I'll sometimes do in drinks. I have had people who are sensitive to it digestive wise. So, I would say if you start out with a small dose of it, like a teaspoon, and then do it with a meal. But I've never had an issue with it. Or you could just do regular coconut oil too. And then making sure in your breakfast smoothie too, do you know if there's fat in there, you think, and fiber, or how do
I
you?
usually just do like a Premier protein and take it with me.
A Premier Protein one? Did you
Mhm.
say? Sorry, you cut out for a second. Okay, yeah, so
Yeah.
Premier Protein, I like those, but they're pretty much all protein and carb. And so that's where like you're not getting any fat. And so I think if you added
Okay.
that in, you might feel a lot more full throughout the morning. Not even full, but just like less shaky later.
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes you might have to try to like adjust your routine so you do eat every 3 to 4 hours. But I really think if you can just boost your calories and protein and all of that, if you can work that up a little earlier in the day, that might help
When
before
I
you do the supplements. Because I think the like inositol might not be right for you because that's actually gonna like almost lower blood sugar more. That's more for people who have high insulin and high blood
okay.
um, which we could still test, but we're also at less than a minute, so it's probably gonna cut us out here. You guys want to jump back on, or do we feel good?
Will it
I
really
think it
kick
feels
you
good.
off?
Well, I don't have the pro, so yes, it will after 45 minutes.
Oh, good to
I
know.
was meaning actually today that I'm like, I need to adjust